stairs. Clowns to the left of me, jokers to the right. Here I am, stuck in the middle with you.
Hey, here's another edition of the Semicast. Today, we're on the eve of the preseason coaches poll. And so I'm curious to see who is going to be surrounding FSU. Who the fuck is FSU going to be stuck in the middle between? Some clowns, some jokers? I'm sure there will be. I wish I could have done this podcast after the coaches poll had been released, but I just don't have the time right now. This is about the only time I can get on here and talk a little Seminole football, a little college football. So anyways, to the preseason coaches poll. Now this is, to me, the coaches poll is all for just a talking point to get people excited. It's worthless, it doesn't mean anything, but it's another sign that we're on the precipice of the college football season. The Seminoles are 32 days away from kicking off against Ole Miss. 32, we're almost there. Holy shit. Oh, God, just get me more excited. Come next Monday, we will be 4 weeks away. 4 weeks away from kicking off at the Citrus Bowl in Orlando versus Ole Miss. It can't get here soon enough. I mean, it's just, the weeks are flying by now. I mean, we're in the midst of August now. I mean, it is here. It is here. I believe next Wednesday is the start of Florida State fall camp. That's right, you heard me. Florida State fall camp kicks off. Pads are being worn by Seminole players. Jerseys are being donned. Players are throwing passes, catching them, hitting each other. We're here. We're freaking here. And today's coaches poll is just another sign that we're almost at the start of this, what should be just a fantastic season. My thoughts on the poll is where I think people will fall. I'm not going to give a top 25. I'm not going to bore you to death. I'm going to give you my top 5. Preseason. Obviously, it's August, 4th? Obviously, my poll is preseason. Anyways, number 1, Alabama. Conservative, yes. I'm not thinking outside the box at all. But you can't bet against them at this point. Saban has, 4 national titles with them since 2009. They lose their quarterback, of course, but it doesn't matter. They roll out a new quarterback, it doesn't matter. All they do is just have a 4 or 5-star running back run behind an NFL caliber offensive line and run that running back into the ground. And then when he gets in the league, he's pretty much done. But that's another topic for another day. And their defense is always outstanding. Last year, a little bit more on Bama. Before I get to my number 2 team, in the national title game, I heard something so absurd. And I shouldn't even think it's absurd because it's Bama. Their top 2 deep for their front 7 were all 4 and 5-star players. The 2 deep on their front 7 were all 4 and 5-star players. That is insane. The Seminoles recruit on a very high level. I mean, that's obvious. If you're a Florida State fan, you know that. But the gap between Florida State, Florida, LSU even, to Alabama is still fairly substantial. Alabama has had, I think, before this previous class that just signed in February, they had 24 more blue chip recruits than Florida State in the previous 4 classes. So that's blue chip is, of course, a 4 or 5-star player. 24. That is an average of, quick mathematical math tells me that's 6 blue chips on average per year more than Florida State. But if you don't think that's huge, please just Google recruiting matters and stuff. 6 more blue chips per season is huge. So people that don't know what they're talking about might say something like, look, Bama's winning all them titles. Why FSU only has 1? Bama has number 1 class, but FSU's average, class ranking under Jimbo's 3 or 4. So that's not a big difference between 3 and 4 and 1. No, you got to look a little deeper. Okay, so Bama's Bama. Enough about recruiting. I actually should probably do a recruiting podcast way later in the year, probably December after the season's ended. But that just goes to show you how much depth they have, and that why they compete for a national title seemingly every season. And they'll be number one in this coaches poll. I would be shocked if they're not. And they're my number one. Number two, I'm going to go with Clemson. Yep, I'm going to be conservative again. The team that met Alabama in the national title game, that went toe-to-toe with Bama, that almost knocked off the SEC. I mean, the SEC, of course they won. Clemson was so close to beating them. So close. But to be honest, I was actually rooting for Bama to win because that was in FSU's best interest. Not that FSU needs help recruiting, but Clemson, who resides in FSU's division, if they had claimed a national title, then it would have been that much harder to recruit against them. So we still have that over their heads that we can tell recruits, which is good. It's beneficial, obviously. But Watson coming back is really what kind of gave it for me. I was really tempted to put another team number two. You maybe could guess which team that is. But with Watson coming back, he's just a game changer. I mean, you saw what he did to Bama. Had like 500 total yards against them in the national title game. Threw for 4,000. Ran for another 1,000 during the regular season. The guy's phenomenal. And much of that offense returns. Now, the defense, they do lose some players, but they've been recruiting on an elite level, and I thought their defense would have a fall off last year because they lost a lot of guys. So I'm wondering if this year, if maybe they finally have that fall off. But even so, I think they're good enough to warrant that number two position. However, if you listen to these podcasts before, I told you I think FSU beats them in the matchup on October 29th in Doak Campbell. But this is a preseason poll. This is kind of how I think it's going to shape up. It's more of my prediction on my top five. It's not like my genuine top five team. It's more of how I think the preseason top five will be. Okay. Either way, so Bama 1, Clemson 2. Number 3, Florida State. Surprise, surprise, Florida State. The defense should be just outstanding. And on offense, yes, you have questions at quarterback and maybe to a lesser extent receiver. A little bit offensive line question marks. But the offensive line should be much improved and deeper. Receiver, heard just nothing but great things about Rudolph in the spring. Auden Tate looked like he could be a breakout type candidate. Maybe I'll make a breakout podcast for another day. And you have Dalvin Cook. In my opinion, the best college football running back there is going right now. With all due respect to McCaffrey, all due respect to, I'm just drawing a blank here. The guy from LSU, who plays for LSU. Fournette. All due respect to those guys, I think he's the best college running back right now. At worst, he's the most explosive. I think there's almost no debating that. He might not project as the best pro. I think Fournette does. But right now, I would take Dalvin Cook over pretty much any college running back. So with him, what should be improved offensive line, what should be a little bit more explosive receiving core with Tate and Rudolph taking the next step. The quarterback, which I think is going to be Francois, he doesn't have to be Jameis Winston. He doesn't. He has to be somewhere between last year's quarterback play, which quite frankly wasn't that good, and Jameis Winston. Be somewhere in between there, which is good. And this team, to me, is a top 3 team, a college football playoff contender, a national championship contender. Moving to number 4, I'm going with Oklahoma. Oklahoma's offense, as usual, was outstanding last year. Baker Mayfield's back. That's a big reason I'm picking them to be in the top 5 in this preseason poll. And I think they can really probably, I'll say they should win the Big 12. I mean, who knows? Shit can happen, but they have a strong squad coming back. And Mayfield is really a big reason why I think they'll continue to be strong this year. Moving to number 5, back to the SEC. We got LSU. Going with LSU, they're absolutely loaded everywhere. I mean, if Bama's far and away the best recruiting school in the country, and then FSU somewhere in there, then LSU is right in there too. I mean, they can just pluck kids from their own backyard, much like Florida State does. They just pluck kids out of there, and they have so many 4 and 5 stars on their littered on their roster, and in kind of in an atypical fashion, uh, and this is kind of an anomaly as for them. They didn't have a ton of guys go to the draft, which usually, for sure, you can pick 2, 3, 4 guys off their defense almost every season that's headed to the draft. Well, they didn't really have that, so they didn't lose a ton. So that's why they're really loaded this year. Now, the problem with them, of course, as it usually is their quarterback play. Can you trust Brandon Harris? I can't, or I don't rather. He's pretty much hot garbage when he throws the football, if and when he does throw the ball. But they do, like Florida State, have an absolute electric running back. But I just, without even seeing Francois throw a pass in a college football game, I would take him over Harris right now. So, excuse me. They're my number 5 team. All right, the SEC. 2 of the top 5. I mean, come on, man. It's the SEC. We're SEC O&D to nobody. Anyways, we got what? About an hour to the poll releases. I could get back on here if I have time and talk about the actual release of the preseason poll. It should be fun. It always creates excitement, debate. Some teams that FSU plays, where they could fall. I think Louisville will be ranked. I think they'll be ranked somewhere between 10 and 20. Actually, I'll even narrow it down. That's too broad. That's too easy. I'll say they'll be ranked anywhere between 10 and 15. I think some teams, or not some teams, I think some coaches will be high on them. Some other teams, Miami, they could maybe start the year ranked, maybe just inside the top 25. Same for Florida. Not a ton of people are really high on Florida, but they may start 23, 24. We'll see. North Carolina, they could be ranked. That wouldn't shock me too much. Ole Miss, the first game. I don't think they're a top 10 team just based on how much talent they lost. They lost their 2 defensive tackles. They lost their top 2 linebackers, and they lost their top 2 safeties. Not to mention they lost Tunsil and Treadwell on offense. So I don't think they're a top 10 team by year's end, but going to the preseason, they have some cachet built up the past couple years with victories over Alabama. They do recruit well. Hashtag money. But I think they'll probably be in the preseason. I say top 10, top 12 at worst. They'll be highly ranked by the coaches. I just don't see them not getting the respect, even though if you actually project this year, they're probably not going to be ranked that high. Well, we'll see, though. Hey, who knows? It's the first game of the year. They could very well beat Florida State. We'll see. But I think there'll be a handful of teams on FSU's schedule that'll be ranked going into this preseason, which is nice because usually year after year after year, you hear, especially from Gator fans, FSU don't play nobody. What trips me out is FSU's been in the Atlantic Coast Conference for, I think, 25 years, just about, something like that. It's like, no shit, all right? We know they don't play fucking studs week in and week out. They're in the fucking ACC, all right? But what really annoys me is when Florida fans will say that in a year in which Florida State beat Florida. It's like, don't open your mouth when the Gators just lost to FSU. Who cares if they have a quote weaker schedule? But last year, actually, I think FSU finished with a better strength of schedule, or either was even with Florida. It was very close because Florida's schedule wasn't that great last year, despite playing in the ASCC. And this year, at least going into the season, Florida State projects to have a much tougher schedule than Florida. Florida plays, besides FSU, I think they play some garbage out-of-conference teams, and they don't get Alabama on the schedule this year. Their schedule's looking pretty manageable, quite honestly. But anyways, so we'll see where these teams land. It gets me more excited. I'm already like wringing my hands, just waiting for the season to start. See if you can hear that. Yep, that's me hand wringing. I just ready to kick this thing off. All right, well, let me wrap this up. This was my little preseason coaches poll podcast, the eve of the preseason coaches poll being released. I gave you my top 5. It's kind of not necessarily how I would put them, but more so where I think they'll fall. When it's released, when I get an opportunity, I'll actually probably go through the 1 through 25, or at least much of the poll. I'm curious to see how hyped Tennessee is, Michigan, I really want to see how high they'll be in this coaches poll. All right, well, till next time, thank you for listening to another Florida State Simicast.